Jumping right back into the action now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we're going to discuss the Houston Texans because last week they got a big win, a great win over the Buffalo Bills, 23-20. But the very unfortunate news came this week in regards to their wide receiver Nico Collins. Their top wide receiver Nico Collins has officially been placed on the injured reserve and will be required to miss the next 4 games until the Texans are able to reactivate him and have him come back to practice and integrate him again back into the team. So, a big blow, obviously, because Nico Collins was playing very well this year. He was playing at a level that I wouldn't say that people didn't expect him to reach, but it's at a pace right now where with Stefon Diggs, with Tank Dell, with Joe Mixon, I know he's hurt right now, but still, when he was in there, it was a pace that I don't think a lot of people would have expected Nico Collins, of all the wide receivers, to be on at this point in the season. You know, the Texans are 4-1. They're playing great on offense. CJ Stroud's looking very good. All that stuff was kind of expected, but who was going to distinguish themselves out of that group of wide receivers? I thought it was interesting how Nico did it very seamlessly, it seemed like. And in this game against Buffalo, in the first half, he scored that 67-yard touchdown. But to me, the way I was looking at it, he kind of looked like he got hurt in that play, and I don't know if that's confirmed or not, but it looked like when he got into the end zone, he sort of tweaked it or was hobbling on it, being a bit ginger with the way he stepped on it as well. So it looked just a little bit weird, and afterwards, obviously, he went into the locker room. They did the tests on him, and he didn't return after that play, after that series. So dealing with a hamstring injury, it's one of those where it's kind of like an ankle or like an Achilles, you know, the tendonitis with Christian McCaffrey, right? It's always one that I'm always most nervous about because once you get like the knee injuries, right, those are a bit more clear cut in knowing, you know, that it's going to require surgery or not, or is it just going to be season ending or something like that, or are they going to be able to play again this year? But when it's something like a hamstring or an ankle, you could come back, you could be feeling better on it, but I feel like there's always a greater risk of re-aggravating it with these soft tissue injuries. So that's really what would scare me the most. But because he's now on IR, you know, you hate to see it based on how well he was playing, distinguishing himself from Tank Dell and Stefon Diggs, it appeared like. And overall, compared to the rest of the NFL, Nico Collins, through 5 weeks so far, led the NFL in receiving yards. He was tied for third in receptions. He scored 3 touchdowns and had 8 receptions of at least 20 yards or more on the season so far. So he was making a name for himself, not just between himself, Stefon, and Tank Dell, which was always going to be hard, like I mentioned, but in the NFL, I think a lot of people were noticing how, you know, CJ Stroud was finding it very easy to connect with Nico Collins. Not to say that it was hard or anything with Tank Dell or Stefon Diggs, but with Nico, it always felt like they were hitting for big plays or he was going to him when it mattered most. And they were building that reputation, and it was great to see because Nico, you know, signed that deal in the summer. He is locked in long term, so to kind of establish himself, it was always kind of nice to see it play out that way. But now it's obviously a big loss because of who Nico is, obviously, and how good he is, but also because of the Houston Texans' already pretty banged up offense, quite honestly, right? Because we talked about Joe Mixon. I'm a big fan of Joe Mixon based on the fact that in the first 2 weeks, I think he showed us everything that we envisioned he could be for this Texans team, right? Because in the first 2 weeks, I forget how many yards he had against the Colts. It might have been over 130 or something like that, but he played very well in that game, helped them get the win. And then in the second week again, he played a big role in it, but unfortunately he got hurt in that game against the Chicago Bears on a hip drop tackle that wasn't called. So people still feel resentful about that, right, with how big of an emphasis it was this year that they didn't call it. And now it's been since week 2 that Joe Mixon has not been able to play. And it's a big loss, obviously, and now heading into this week, you might have felt a little bit more optimistic, but he did not practice yesterday, and it just adds another day on of kind of speculating, guessing when Joe Mixon could come back. That's not the only one, though. You look at Damian Pierce, their other running back. He was limited yesterday, but he also has been dealing with a hamstring injury, like I talked about before. And it's been a couple weeks now that he hasn't been able to play. And again, you don't really know how it's going to play out with that hamstring injury, right? He's limited yesterday, but the next couple of days it could be sore and he might not play or practice, I should say. So that's another sensitive, touchy injury to kind of get a gauge on. Joe Mixon is an ankle injury, if I didn't mention that before. And it's not only that, but on the offensive line as well. You look at their left guard, Kenyon Green. He did not practice yesterday with a knee injury. Their left tackle, Laramie Tunsil, also didn't practice yesterday with an ankle injury. And their right tackle, Titus Howard, also, again, not practicing yesterday with, you guessed it, a hamstring injury, of course. So 3 starters on the offensive line. Their starting running back, their starting wide receiver, all are banged up and not going to play for, as a collective, probably for the next couple weeks. So if you're talking about any other team, it's very critical, right? It's very serious, right, when all these guys are injured. But Houston has the luxury of still having a guy like Stephon Diggs, obviously, and Tank Dell, who, talking on Tank Dell a little bit, I feel like he's the one that's sort of taken a back seat a little bit the most out of all these guys when Stephon Diggs arrived. And it's not to say that like when you say something like that, it feels like it's like a bad thing, right? That Diggs joined and now you're not getting the most out of Tank Dell, and it's almost like too much. You have too many good players. But I'm not trying to paint it out that way. It's more so of the fact that I just feel like, Stephon, it feels like he's a more urgent player right now because he is more of a veteran. He might not even be there next year. And how Nico's playing, it's hard to get the ball to everybody. But I feel like now this is a great opportunity for Tank Dell, because if you look at last year, in his rookie season, he was on an awesome pace last year to really, contribute a lot. And it was a shame he got hurt last year, because who knows what kind of rookie season he could have had if he played the entirety of that year. And, this year, his best game so far has been a 5-reception, 62-yard game against the Minnesota Vikings, who they lost to. So now it's a great opportunity. You don't love to see it because Nico's hurt, but it's not a situation where, you have to panic and maybe bring someone up or start looking at other options. You have Tank Dell there and Stephon Diggs, which I'm sure a lot of teams would love to have as their only 2 options. The Texans have the luxury of having them on top of 2 other great options. So I feel like Tank Dell now can really use this time to be maybe the number 1 target for CJ, or be the number 2 instead of the number 3 potentially when Nico Collins is there. And kind of remind everybody what made him so special and what distinguished himself last year on the rookie season that he was having. So it's a bummer that Nico is hurt. I want to say that, but also I am excited to see what Tank Dell does with it, does with this opportunity as well. And over the next couple of games, we look at them at the games that Nico Collins might miss, or he will have to miss, actually, being on IR. It's this upcoming week at the New England Patriots. They should probably still win that game. Also, the following week after that, they're going to be in Green Bay. Tougher game for the Texans. And then they're home again against the Indianapolis Colts, where last time it was a close game. Now they'll be hosting the Colts in the 3rd week of that. And their final game that Nico Collins should miss, based on the IR, is at the New York Jets. And based on how the Jets look right now, I would favor the Texans, obviously, in that game. And if worse comes to worse, the game after that will be at home against the Detroit Lions. So, I think it's important to stress now that looking at that schedule, this 4-game schedule that I had out here, I still expect the Texans to at least be favored and potentially win 3 of the next 4. And hopefully they have everybody back for that Sunday night game against the Lions in the 5th week of this injured reserve period that Nico Collins is supposed to miss. So, it is a bad thing, but it isn't such a dire situation, because I think after this Jets game, I forget what it was, but they play the Lions, they play the Cowboys. I'm pretty sure they play a couple other tough teams. I'll actually try to pull it up right now. But it's almost a little bit fortunate that Nico Collins, got hurt now. Ideally, obviously he doesn't get hurt, but it does come at a point where he could miss these next couple games and then be back for the real big ones. Because, like I said, once we go after this Jets game, we have that Lions game that Nico should be back for potentially. Then after that, they play the Cowboys. Then they play 2 divisional games with the Titans and the Jaguars. And they play the Dolphins, then the Chiefs, then the Ravens and the Titans to close out their year. But I think these next games are definitely manageable for them. They're definitely, other than probably the Green Bay game, all these other games are definitely winnable. And probably the Texans are favored in these games. So how they managed it. I will say, though, while they are still favored, their defense is going to have to sort of step up a little bit more, knowing that you might not have all your weapons on offense, right? Obviously, so you got to be a little bit more disciplined on the defensive side of the ball, a bit more disciplined on offense, surely. You can't have the strip sack fumble, right? The interception late in the game against the Bills. All those little things that kind of hurt yourself, you got to cut some of them off a little bit and be more focused in because you don't have the luxury of falling back on as many weapons as you did. So the defense has to step up. They can't hurt themselves. And the discipline around this team now, the margin of error has shrunk a little bit because of these injuries. So they got to be on their X's and O's about that. But still, it's not the end of the world. They have great talent still. And CJ's on a great trajectory, and that makes a lot of difference, obviously, when your quarterback is considered one of the best in the NFL. So I'm excited most of all to see Tank Dell. I think he will take this opportunity to remind everyone what he's all about. But in the meantime, moving on from the Houston Texans and their wide receiver, we're going to go back to talking about quarterbacks and talking about 2 of the most scrutinized quarterbacks so far in this NFL season, Deshaun Watson and Jalen Hurts. They're going to be looking at each other this upcoming Sunday when their teams face off, and we're going to be discussing, who needs to win this matchup more, who needs to play better more so than the other, and who do I think will play better based on how these 2 teams have looked so far. We're going to talk about those 2 guys in more of a spotlight on how their seasons have been going when we return after this short break.
Look.